Right, it's almost a month ago now that I published the video on the demise of Norton motorcycles. It's not a video that I'd intended revisiting it. To be honest, it wasn't a video that I intended doing in the first place. It was more circumstances with the weather, difficulties in filming for what I'd planned to do that prompted me to publish that particular video, which went down quite well. Now, at that time, information really was just starting to work its way out of the woodwork. But the result of that video is that I had an awful lot of people get in touch with me. People that used to work at the factory, or new people that used to work at the factory, and the stories that they had to tell. People that had had their legs bitten by Stuart Garner and the Norton concern, people that had paid deposits on bikes, or had even been persuaded to pay the full price for bikes that never arrived. And of course the general press and motorcycle press have all leapt on this with further stories of wrongdoing coming out of the woodwork. Stories that in some way clarify some of the content of my original video that I think I ought to mention. And of course the public outcry that an investigation should be undertaken as to why the government handed over a total of £5 million to Norton motorcycles, when most clearly, looking back, a little bit of digging would have revealed that it wasn't a good bet. Now, I don't have the resources or the influence to go around knocking on doors and interviewing people to get to the bottom of this story. So for the most part, I'm having to rely on editorials and articles published by various different agencies, both in the motorcycle trade and general press. Now, I don't want to be accused of plagiarism, and also I don't really want to get embroiled in any copyright action. So I am going to have to be very careful how I present some facts from some agencies. Where necessary, I will just outline the bare bones of these articles and then point you in the direction of that actual article, because I don't want to sort of usurp or basically sort of steal any thunder from these organisations. They've done the hard work and they deserve the credit for it. What I want to try and do is sort of bring the whole story together. At the moment, everything's in little bits and pieces spread all over the world. I'm just going to try and sort of pull all those facts from the far reaches of the internet together into one digestible video to give people a clearer idea of what's actually happened. Now, first of all, Stuart Garner, the man himself, the character of Stuart Garner. Mr. Garner, it would appear, had quite a privileged background, and rather than using that background to seize opportunities and move forward, it would appear that he simply rested on his laurels until he left school. I read an interview that he took part in some obscure sort of town and country type magazine shortly after he took the helm at Norton, where he was quite open about the fact that as a young adult, he, to all intents and purposes, just fell flat on his face. He lamented that all his school friends had left school, they'd got good jobs, started promising careers, got the foot on the property ladder, and had married and started to have families. Mr. Garner, on the other hand, had only just managed to acquire a job as an assistant gamekeeper, a job which I had he failed to hang on to. Now, by his own admission, his dismissal from this job related to the fact that he preferred to spend his time and money chasing women and drinking rather than working, so presumably he was dismissed for not turning up for work or turning up late. Now, for me, this gives a really good indication of the guy's character, because it appears that this sort of behaviour has continued throughout his life. And certainly some of those personality traits seem to have come into play with his handling of Norton. The sort of personality that wanted to portray the playboy lifestyle as a champion of industry, but didn't particularly want to put in the work that was required to achieve it. Not honestly, anyway. Now, apparently his saviour came in the form of a girlfriend. She had a wealthy background from a successful family business, and Stuart Garner was unemployed and penniless. Taking pity on his daughter's predicament, Stuart Garner's future father-in-law gave him a job in the warehouse of the family business, and presumably from there he worked his way up through the company. Whether that was on his own merit or whether it was part of the privilege afforded by his relationship wasn't made clear. The next big question is, how did this guy become the managing director of what is probably one of the biggest motorcycle names in world history? That is actually a really fascinating story which has been outlined by Superbike magazine. Garner was an acquaintance of a man named Stuart Tiller, co-founder and equal partner in Spondon Engineering, a world-famous company renowned for its motorcycle racing frames. Stuart Tiller's partner wanted to retire and was looking for someone to buy his share of the business out. This share was offered to Stuart Garner, which he accepted with relish, even though he didn't have the funds to buy it, but he didn't tell them that at the time. Deceit and manipulation seemed to come heavily into play during this business transaction, and Garner did pay for his new share of the business in full, although it wasn't quite in the manner that the seller had expected. He had to wait a long time for his money. And for the most part, Garner didn't use his own money, it was borrowed from someone else. Now, I will find and leave a link to the Superbike article in the video description now below. And it is basically a tale of deceit and manipulation. Garner took 50% control of a well-respected and historic engineering company that had a full order book and hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank, and reduced it to rubble. The final death knock being when his partner discovered that without his permission or knowledge, Garner had basically mortgaged the business and used the proceeds to buy Norton. Just as the use of smoke and mirrors had dominated Garner's business management of Spondon Engineering, it was also set to be employed with Norton, but on a much bigger scale. So let's fast forward to the current situation. Norton has, to all intents and purposes, gone bust, and the administrators are looking for ways of sorting it out. Independent Television News has published an expose on Garner and Norton. Norton and Garner, to all intents and purposes, appears for several years now to have been parading a collection of glossy prototypes around the world, selling the idea to governments and investors that they are a company that is worth investing in. But the reality is they have actually produced very few bikes, and the prototypes are just a sham. A carrot that has been dangled in front of the British government, who in response have given £4 million of the taxpayers' money to Stuart Garner and loaned a further £1 million to Stuart Garner to assist with continuance of a business that doesn't really exist. The government has also been instrumental in putting forward Norton's name as a good investment to other investors and loan companies. In 2018, our then Prime Minister, Theresa May, personally took Garner to China and presented him to Chinese business as a champion of British industry. Now, it would seem that everyone and their dog, including politicians and the media, are screaming at the government for a public inquiry as to why this money was given to Garner. The government is very reluctant to do this, and certainly as it stands at the moment have given no indication that they're going to go ahead and do it. They state that they exercised due diligence with all their dealings regarding Garner and Norton, but I'm afraid I've got a problem with that. They have got enormous investigative resources at their disposal. That money did not belong to the government, it belonged to me and you. It was paid in taxes and it was entrusted to the government to be used wisely. Now, just putting aside for the moment the big pension scam that Norton has been embroiled in, and the fact that customers have put deposits and full payment down on bikes that they've never received. A couple of mornings ago I spent 5 minutes on the internet and I came up with this. From August 2012. A publication from a magazine called Biker Glory, detailing that there had been clear indications as far back as 2011 that Norton was not what it purported to be, and that someone needed to take a closer look at it. And it's not the only one out there if you look hard enough. Now, one of the most disturbing facts about this particular article that caught my eye was Motorcycle News. And this sort of clarifies some murmurings that I heard when I made the last video. That Motorcycle News was in many ways complicit to Stuart Garner's and Norton's actions. They had received numerous complaints from readers of paying deposits and paying for bikes and not getting the bikes, as well as customer care issues and warranty issues with the bikes. Motorcycle News fully admitted to this. They also admitted that they considered the complaints to be genuine. But instead of publicising it and letting people know what was going on, they chose instead to cover Norton's exploits at the Isle of Man, stating basically that they chose to run the story that would be least destructive to those involved. Least destructive for who? The 228 people, I think it was, that lost their pensions by investing them in Norton. The hundreds of customers around the world that read Motorcycle News' spin and decided to put a deposit or pay for a bike that they would never receive. The investors and the banks that ploughed their money into Norton never to be seen again. Or the suppliers around the world that thought Norton was a good bet, manufactured parts for them and never got paid for them. Now, I personally don't read the Motorcycle News. I haven't done for over a decade. I consider it to be a worthless rag. Even more so after discovering this. Both the UK government and Motorcycle News have been instrumental in facilitating Stuart Garner to do what he's done. Both organisations have a responsibility for what they do, and many people will have based their purchasing decisions, even though they didn't get anything for their purchase, and their investment decisions on the information that these organisations have provided. The government shouldn't need persuading to carry out an investigation. That should have been their first port of call. And as for Motorcycle News, joining the pack and screaming out at Norton louder than everybody else and slinging mud harder than anybody else doesn't excuse what you've done. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Now, it's all very well shouting and screaming about wasted public money. What doesn't seem to be getting quite as much attention are the little people like me and you. In mid-February, the Ombudsman held an inquiry into the 10 or 14 million pounds worth of pension investments that have disappeared, entrusted to Garner by honest working people. Garner failed to turn up for the hearing. Surprise, surprise. In fact, for a man who has for a long time been very vocal, he's pretty much refusing to talk to anyone. He's refusing to explain why he borrowed £160,000 from Norton last year, money which is still outstanding, and whether he intends to pay it back. He's refused to answer questions about a loan that he made through Norton to another company owned by him that hasn't been repaid and is now considered unrecoverable. Obviously another failed business of his. He doesn't want to talk about his game reserve in Botswana. And he also doesn't want to talk about why, when the company was going down the pan for several years, so obviously, he felt the need to buy 6 Aston Martins, 1 performance Jaguar sports car and 2 Range Rovers. I mean, just selling a couple of his cars would have sorted out his tax bill. At the end of the day, you can only drive 1 car at a time. And then, of course, we've got the Norton funds that were used to purchase his home, Donington Hall, a huge 18th century mansion. And I believe he also siphoned some money off to buy a hotel. The whole thing just beggars belief. Now, it's all very well talking about how public money's been spent in these circumstances, but I think the main reason I made this video is the reports that I've had from people that have paid deposits and paid the full amounts for the bikes that they've never got and they're never going to get. By all accounts, the reports that are coming through say that Garner was approaching Chinese companies to manufacture parts for the bikes. They would supply the parts, he wouldn't pay the bill, they refused to supply any more parts, so he would move on to another company and do the same thing, and then another company and do the same thing, until it got to the point where no one would supply him with parts. Yet apparently Norton was ringing up customers who had paid deposits on bikes, telling them that the bikes were about to start on the production line and that they needed the balance in order to actually build them. So these people handed over huge amounts of cash to get the bikes based on that promise. And Norton took that money, in some cases as much as £44,000 for 1 bike, knowing full well that they couldn't build those bikes for the customer because they didn't have the parts to build them. Now, I'm a little bit rusty on criminal law, but as far as I'm concerned, that is obtaining money by deception. They've solicited money from someone for a service or a product they know they cannot supply. You know, there is very strong, reasonable suspicion that a serious crime has been committed there. Why aren't the police involved? And I'm sorry to say that it gets even worse. Now, I had heard stories, but I have to admit I didn't fully believe them, that people were submitting the bikes to Norton for warranty work to be done, and the bikes were being stripped and the parts used to build new bikes to sell to customers. That, I believe, is theft. Those bikes are not Norton's property, they're entrusted to them for warranty work, so to remove parts from them and sell them to someone else is theft. And sure enough, when the administrators moved in and started taking stock of what was on the factory floor, apparently they discovered numerous customers' bikes that had been brought in for warranty that had been stripped of parts. The Leicestershire police should be all over this, but there's no mention of them investigating these matters anywhere. The question has to be asked. What is going on? Why is Garner still wandering around, enjoying his cars, ignoring questions from people, failing to turn up at tribunals, enjoying his game reserve in Botswana? Why is the government not investigating what has been going on? Why are the police not investigating what has been going on? I'll leave you to make your minds up about that, and feel free to leave comments in the comments section and let me know what your thoughts are. But please, as always, refrain from bad language and keep your comments polite and respectful. I don't intend revisiting this subject again. It's, as I say, I was inundated with responses from people after the last video, and I thought, you know, out of respect for the information they were giving to me, I needed to make this video. I may, in the dim and distant future, when this is all finished, because I think it's going to go on for some time before it all comes out in the wash, I may revisit this again and just summarise what has happened in the end. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video and helping to support my channel. I really do appreciate your time. I hope you found this video enlightening, useful. If you're anything like me, it's probably just made your blood boil. But either way, I would appreciate it if you enjoyed it, if you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you are a subscriber, please remember to hit the notification button so that you can be informed every time I upload a new video. I will of course be back on Friday, so until then, ride safely and I'll see you soon.